Welcome back to another chess game analysis video. Long time no see, I hope you're all doing alright. I'm back with more videos and now I've gotten a little bit more time. I'm playing with the black pieces in a club tournament and I tried something which I've never played before from the black perspective. Went into an Italian game against my opponent, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4 and bishop c5. As you know me normally, when someone opens with e4, I normally go for Carcan, or sometimes even Sicilian, or I play something entirely different, but mostly these two. But now I decided to go e5. I thought, why not try this opening from the black side for once, what can happen. I go into this very nice symmetrical Italian game, castles. My opponent known for quick development, not normally for great tactics in the opening, so I thought, okay, why not? I developed knight f6, d3, d6, just a solid Italian middle game or opening. Bishop g5 pinning the knight, bishop g4 pinning the other knight. So you go very symmetrically here in this position. You just try to copy with black and maybe afterwards go for a little bit of a tactical middle game or where you can actually try something, maybe strike in the center. But now you just basically develop h3. Now he asks my bishop h5. I don't want to give away that bishop just yet. Maybe you could have traded it off here. Would have maybe been better, but I thought why not leave it on the board. Knight bd2 development h6. Now I ask his bishop the question and he returns to e3. But he can trade off my bishop, but first I go back. If he wants to take, then I just take and have the open file for my rook. So I just went back. c3, the standard Italian plan. You try to play c3 and d4 at some point. I castle. Now I have time. a3. I don't really understand the move and it's not that great. The engine actually says that something like this is better. And then maybe with the idea of expanding here, maybe at some point bring the rook into the center. Just a normal Italian game move. I don't really understand that move. If you want to play, you can already play before if you want to. Could maybe be an overextension, but I'm not so sure if the black plan actually in the Italian game, so because I mostly don't play it. That's also one reason why I wanted to do this video and the analysis, that I can take a little bit closer look. Here in this position, why is it actually an inaccuracy? Because now, normally with white, you try to push d4 in the center as fast as possible, and here actually it's black who can push the pawn into the center first and gain a little bit of a space advantage temporarily and trade off this very nice e-pawn. E takes d5, knight takes d5. And this is a position where now I have got a central pawn and white doesn't. And first of all, white needs to prove that he can put a pawn into the center himself. First he trades here the bishop. Bishop takes b6, which I think is okay. I take with the knight, which can be done objectively, but I think afterwards, I think a takes b6 is much more logical. Leave the knight in the center, open the file for the rook. It looks a little bit better, because now what happens after knight takes b6 is that my opponent actually attacks the knight, which you could theoretically just defend with bringing the queen into the center, but I didn't like this. I thought I would maybe get kicked by the pawns or by the knight at some point. So I just developed rook e8, which is okay, bringing the rook into the center. But now, obviously, my opponent has the chance to destroy my pawn structure, which he does. Bishop takes c6 and b takes. So this is a little bit nasty here, but nothing is lost. It's still a little bit better for black, or maybe equal. A good position for both sides to still play for a win here. Queen c2 development. Now I bring the bishop, which is now not really doing anything. It was pinning the knight to the queen. Now it attacks this pawn, which is still a little bit of a backwards pawn, because white has never really pushed it to the center. So he plays knight e1, defending the pawn this way. c5. Now the pawn is pinned because of my bishop, looking this way, so I really want to play c4 now and try to win this pawn, which is still a little bit ugly placed. b3, he defends it, and now you can immediately start to attack the pawn chain with a5, which I will do afterwards. First I centralize the queen. He plays knight e4 into the center. Now I come with a5. Idea is to play a4 and maybe the knight can come in here, or maybe destabilize the position a little bit more, that my c4 plan actually can work. He pushes c4 now himself, which weakens this square if my knight ever comes in here, or a rook, as you will see. This can be a little bit of a weakness, but now it's, I think, okay. Queen moves back, and now queen e2. His plan is basically to stabilize, and I think white is now trying to hold the position for a draw in this instance. Rook a d8, just development, and bring the rook into the center. Queen e3, and now rook d4. Now the rook has infiltrated the position, and the weak square is now occupied by the rook, which is not the best piece. I think a knight would be better there, but it's still very ugly because your backwards pawn can never really push because there's a rook here. So he tries f3, stabilizes the position further, and this knight is just a good piece there and can basically stay there, which I think the one interesting variation would be to attack the rook immediately with knight f3, which I calculated in the game. But the problem here is you can take the knight, and if the knight takes the rook, then you just have e takes d4, you just up a pawn, and the queen's attacked. And here, this battery is nasty, this pawn is probably gonna fall. Maybe this pawn is gonna fall at some point. There is a4 coming, the knight comes in here. The rook very nasty here, aligned with the queen. So this is already lost. So this variation with the knight doesn't really work. You would have to take here, in this instance, you would have to take with the pawn, but then rook takes e4. This just wins a pawn, and very active, good rook. I think this would be definitely better for black. So my opponent instead just played f3, stabilizing the position, but this is just such an ugly knight now. Can't really go anywhere. Could go here, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Now, I want to get rid of the knight. Strong piece here. f5, knight needs to go back. And now queen d6, which is not that accurate. Better would have been to bring the rook back, because the rook isn't really doing much more than just blocking the opponent's pawn, which is not that good of a use case, I think, for the rook. And I can't really double the rooks anyway on this file, because the queen's already attacking this pawn the whole time. So bringing back the rook and maybe bring the queen in here, or maybe try this plan with the a4 to bring the knight here, would have been a little bit better, but I decided queen d6, immediately trying to maybe triple here and do something. Queen e2. Here, actually, interestingly enough, now I tried my plan with a4, which is okay, but it's a bigger advantage would be e4 now in the center, trading off stuff, which I completely didn't take into account here, because f takes e4, f takes d4, d takes e4, bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes, and queen f2. Looks very equal. It's a little bit better for black because of the activity of the pieces. Everything's still in the corner. For me, very active pieces here in the center of the board. And I can play in this position a4. Undermine the pawn structure if takes, then just the knight can take here. The pawn structure is just weak. Mine as well, but maybe because of the activity of the pieces, this is a little bit better for black. Maybe white can still hold this, I think, but this would have been the plan to actually go for. I just went a4 immediately because I exactly saw this idea. If the pawn ever takes, then the pawn structure is just very bad. The knight comes in here, and maybe the rook can even go to the a file. This is definitely better for me. So a4, and he responded by playing knight c2. Attacks the rook now on this way, which I think is very interesting. And you can try to save the rook here by playing something like this, holding the rook on the board, but I didn't like the rook there. I thought it was very vulnerable. The pawns have this square, the knight has these squares, and I just didn't like my rook there. Seems like a weird rook on f4. Seems very unnatural, so this is why I decided to sacrifice the rook here. I thought maybe I got a winning advantage, sacrificing the exchange. I play a takes b3, which is objectively sound, and the engine would actually prefer likely to hold the rook here, but I thought practical chances are there. Very strong pawn here, attacking the knight, and now my knight can finally come in here. I thought this was compensation for me, and it is equal. Even though I lose the exchange here, knight takes d4, e takes. You can also take with the queen here, but the type of position that occurs is slightly different. I preferred it to take with the e pawn, activate my rook here. Maybe the rook can come in here, and maybe I push here. The bishop looks into this backward pawn, which is always a weakness. So my opponent now queen's attacked queen b2. Now this pawn is probably gonna fall. I have one pawn for the exchange at the moment, but I'm gonna lose this pawn now. Knight a4. Compensation after knight queen takes b3 and knight c3 is this open file for my rook, which is very nice. I have a bishop after such a move, which can be active. Queen very central looks in here. This knight is just a monster knight, defended by this pawn, and no real good chance to trade it off here. So a very strong knight. I'm down the exchange at this point, and I don't really have a decisive winning attack, but I at least have a good drawing chance here. I didn't like this position, by the way, in the game. That's why I also sacrificed the exchange. I thought this could give me a little bit of an edge. He plays very natural. Generally, I think he played very solid. Nothing spectacular, but no real decisive mistakes here. Always a little bit more or less in drawing range, which I also think is very interesting in this game. That there are no huge spikes. Can also happen sometimes in a chess game. Rook e2 now. I want this knight to be able to infiltrate here, come in here and give some checks, and always have the option of the queen also coming in here. So if he takes here, if he does nothing, then the queen probably comes in here, attacks the knight, and then he's at some point just forced to take. So he just went ahead and took. Rook takes e2, knight takes e2, king f1, pretty much forced. The queen also has these squares inside. If the king goes into the corner, then you have this check here. The queen, if you go here, there are also discoveries, but if you go here, there's just the same maneuver all over again. You are at the starting point. So that's why my opponent decided to go to f1, attacks the knight, but basically forces the same issue with this pawn structure here, and the queen always eyeing these squares, and the knight very nicely placed here, which can always shuffle around, maybe even go here, attack this pawn. Very equal position, and I have a threefold repetition here, and I'm down an exchange here. So the only chance for me holding this draw is the repetition. Knight g3, king g1, that's a good move from him. He goes back to g1 and lets himself get triple repetition, a threefold repetition, which ends the game at this point with a draw. Quickly to show, if he doesn't go into the threefold repetition, but tries to escape the checks from the knight, then the queen just comes in here, and he quickly calculated this and pretty quickly saw that this would not work, because king needs to go, queen e2 check. This just loses an entire piece on the spot. Now I have 2 pieces for a rook, which is better, but the position, just the activity. This rook doesn't do anything. The king very exposed here. And one variation would be a4 as the engine. There is nothing actually here. Knight e2. Now the knight comes very nicely to this central square where it was before. And oh, I didn't want to do this. Yep. That doesn't. Oh. So. And here, something like this, and then I told you this maneuver before f4. The bishop comes in here, and you're gonna get checkmated here eventually. So this is why king g1 was played, and now the threefold repetition of the knight on the board, which ends the game on the spot here with a draw. And I think the maneuver with sacrificing the exchange was actually pretty nice, and the threefold repetition as well. If you have the chance to take a draw being down materially, you should do so. I liked this game, even though nothing really spectacular happened. But I liked the tactical or the strategical ideas of the pawn structure and yeah. So I hope you like this. If you have suggestions for other games or games that you played yourself that you want me to analyze, go ahead, write them into the comments. And I hope to see you in the next few videos.